Well, howdy, folks. Welcome to the September 2025 edition of Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate. Glad to be your host. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the communities, historical elements, museums, and other attractions along the historic trails. And Lonnie Steben is our showcase chair. The Cattle Trails Showcase was initiated 4 years ago by the International Chisholm Trail Association, now as a project of the Historic Cattle Trails Consortium, which seeks to promote all the historic trails: the Chisholm Trail, the Western Trail, also known as Great Western, Shawnee Trail, and the Goodnight Loving Trail we're going to hear more about today. I do want to remind you once again that the first ever National Cattle Trails Conference is coming up this fall on October 24-25 in Cleburne, Texas. Be checking that website, historiccattletrails.com, for more information. Folks, we encourage you to get into the chat if you're in position to do so, and just to enter into the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you and know where you might be joining us from today. So if you can get into the chat and put your location in the chat, we'd be interested to see that. Today, we are delighted to welcome back Tom Ashmore, the president of the West Texas Archeological Society, presented to us a year or so ago. He's going to tell us more about the Pecos River's Horsehead Crossing and the annual Horsehead Crossing Goodnight Loving Trail Celebration. That will take place coming up soon, a month away, October 10 and 11 of 2025. Tom is the official historian and archaeologist for Horsehead Crossing, having worked on the site for the last 15 years. He was the inspiration for the upcoming annual celebration, worked with landowner Ernest Woodward to create the annual event, which has been operating since 2020. So with that, Tom, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Glad to be back, and I'm glad to talk about this. It's a very exciting event. It's one of the few events where I think people can come to a location that is the exact location that this important crossing and the opening of the West, you can actually stand there at that location. The owner has kept it open to the public all this time, and we decided to put this together some years back so that we could continue to memorialize it, because so many things happened there, and many people actually died there for various reasons. But it is a place of considered sacred. It's considered sacred by the Indians as well as the Europeans. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. We'll talk a little bit about the cattle drives that came through there, but also the other things that made this place so well known. And then we'll go through the various events that we've had each year leading up to this year. So to start off, a little bit of the history here. If you look at the main trails here, you'll see that to get across the West at this point from during the early 1800s, you either had to come from the St. Louis, Arkansas area down this northern trail, or you would come by steamship to Indianola and then make your way to San Antonio. And from San Antonio, you had two options. You could take the lower immigrant trail, or you could take the upper immigrant trail. A lot of people, they chose these trails for various reasons, but one of the reasons that they chose the upper trail was because the lower trail was there was only one way to get from the lower area here to this upper area. It's a very difficult and one trail and one trail only, well known to the Indians. And there was already a lot of attacks that happened on that trail. And when you're going up that trail, there's no other way to go. So a lot of people would avoid it for that reason and go up the upper immigrant trail. The reason that the trails went these particular routes is because, I'll show you here, because of water. These are the water stops that you could arrive at very close together. So you always had water along the way for each one of these trails. You would get to this one area right here, and you would have to cross one particular area that was very difficult without water to make it to the final crossing of Horsehead. For wagon trains, they usually went up the west side of the Pecos to continue on to El Paso, which is where everybody's endpoint was before continuing west. Or you could go up the north or the west side, and the cattle drives all went up that side, and the stagecoach went up that side. Later on, they could cross and go down to Fort Stockton after it finally got started, and make the lower combined into the lower Immigrant Trail all the way to Stockton or to El Paso. So this is the reason that these particular routes were used. It was everything out there is water. That's the most important thing. The Horsehead Crossing is the end point of several trails, and they're all the same thing, and they all had different names but they were actually the same thing. And that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier. The Butterfield Trail and the Goodnight Loving Trail were actually the same thing. It was also the Upper Immigrant Wagon Trail, and it was also later on the Upper San Antonio to El Paso mail route for a very short period of time through Horsehead Crossing in 1868, until they detoured it a little bit farther south. And then you can see this is an original drawing. When the Bartlett Boundary Commission in 1850 came across, he took with him an artist, and in his journal he would do these pen and ink drawings, and you can see this is them getting across. If you look over here to the right, you can see the men are actually standing in the water. So the water wasn't all that deep. It was just very dangerous. This was one of the few places that you could get into the river and back out of the river with the banks were fairly level banks, whereas the rest of the river is like a gully. And it was very dangerous, very muddy, and very steep banks. So this is one of the reasons that this location was used. This is a painting that we got by permission from the Abel Hanger Foundation in the Petroleum Museum in Midland. They gave us permission to use these both here and in any of our documentation. And this is a very, very close depiction as described by John Bartlett, of his crossing. And during this point here, these two wagons got tied together accidentally. One got pushed into the other, and the mules started losing their footing and started panicking. And there was a danger of them getting swept downriver. And you can see this guy here, his name is Clement Young, and he jumped into the water and took the picket rope and grabbed the lead mule there, and everybody was able to turn the wagons to get them across and stop them from being swept downstream. So this is a very accurate picture by following the depiction by this man who in 1850 crossed the river here at Horsehead Crossing. The crossing was first used by the Humano Indians. They were traders. They traded from our San Angelo area across to New Mexico, down to Mexico proper, even across to Louisiana, and all the way up north into Oklahoma and Colorado. They were friendly Indians and traders and the first buffalo hunters. And their entire nation was pretty much centered at that point in time around San Angelo here. Later, the Apache came in and the Comanche came in, but the Comanche particularly used the crossing because they started their raids into Mexico for their horses, and they would always cross at this point. When they were coming back up from their Mexico raids, they were running those horses as hard as they could run them because they were always considered that there was pursuers behind them. So they ran them hard, and when they got to the Pecos, the horses, many of them stopped and got stuck in the muddy banks and couldn't get out. Of course, the Indians aren't going to try to help get them out. They just moving on as fast as they could, and the horses would just die there in great numbers. And the skeletons later would float down the river because the Indian crossing is not exactly where the wagon crossing for the Europeans was. It was, and I'll show that to you here in a little bit. So they would go down the river, and they ended up with their skeletons and carcasses on the banks. And as the Europeans, mostly the wagon trains, were coming across, they started taking the skulls off of them and putting them up on the bushes, just to be funny, I guess. And that's how it got the name of Horsehead Crossing. The other thing that was prominent here was the Butterfield Trail and the Butterfield. There was a station called Horsehead Crossing Station, and this is the opening of the trail, and it is Waterman Ormsby who is the correspondent, and this is his what he sent back.
As I lay dozing on the seat about 3 o'clock on Sunday morning, I heard a cry from Jones that we had reached the Pecos River. After hallooing and blowing our horn, we obtained an answer, as we supposed, from the other side of the river, telling us to drive upstream, which advice we followed, when to our astonishment we found ourselves in camp on the same side of the river. The fact is, the Pecos makes such a turn here that you can hardly tell which side you're on.
It's a very snaky river. It turns and turns and turns. So that's what he's talking about. And this is the type of coaches that they were using back throughout the entire crossings of Texas. It wasn't the typical Concord coach. It was this one here called the mud wagon. This is looking at it from above, and the route that as they were coming in, this is the east side is up on the upper part of this picture. And they would come down and then wrap around into where the station was. I actually have been to the location of the station. It's not there anymore because it was adobe and taken it completely away. But you can see there in the picture that the vegetation still grows in a rectangular fashion better than the vegetation anything around it. And that defines the station as it was at that point. And it was documented to be adobe. You can actually see the wagon trail that I've highlighted in the arrows down here that came into the back side of this. It was all adobe walled with they would go straight into the back end of it there to change the mules. The front end was the building. Then we talk about the cattle drives. That last part, 25 miles with no water. So they would go 3 days and 3 nights without stopping, because if they stopped, the cattle would just lay down and not get up. They lost still 500 on that first drive. They didn't really know how to handle too much this extreme long distance of no water. So between the getting to the crossing, the cattle getting stuck in the mud in the crossing, and then some of the cattle dropping even after the crossing going up river, ended up losing 500, but they still made a lot of money. It was like $12,000 in gold, and that time was quite a bit. You can multiply that by about, I think, 30 now, and you'll find out about what they were making in that time period. Here's another depiction or journaled by Charles Goodnight on that first drive.
As soon as they smelled the cool air, They became wild for water, and when they reached the river, those behind pushed the ones in the lead right on across before they had time to stop and drink. I turned them back, and they readily went in again, drinking as they swam. I returned as quickly as possible to meet Mr. Loving, who held the remainder of the herd, about 500 head. In the meantime, the wind shifted, and as soon as they smelled the water, they became unmanageable. They were virtually crazy and would go either to the water or not at all. The point of the river for which they were headed was like a ditch, with banks from 6 to 10 feet high. When they reached the river, they never halted, but poured right over the bank, and the remainder of the horses went in with them.
And so you can see, coming from Castle Gap, those banks are still there. So that's pretty amazing. The wagon crossing would have been at this southern portion down here. So the wagons would come down and they would come across here and then wrap around to come across the river here. But those cattle came straight down, and that's where they ended up, right off of these banks. Here's another one from him.
I put them to grass and placed one of the best men, Charlie Wilson, in charge of them, telling him to hold them while they grazed, but not to let them go back to the river for a while. I set out to help the drags, but glancing back, saw 6 cows on their way to the river. The cows stopped at one of the detached, strongly alkaline pools. 3 finished drinking before I could reach them. As they turned away from the water, one after another dropped in her tracks and died.
You can see that those remnants of those alkaline pools that he's talking about are still there in satellite imagery. You can't tell when you're on the ground. You can only tell from above. And this is the grazing area that he talked about. You can tell that this area here is very alkaline prone here. So they had to take the cattle back out beyond that area to get them back to grass. And so when this is where they crossed here, down here, and so those cattle were coming back to the water, but they were coming back to this part of the river water that they smelled, and they came straight across this alkaline pool area. So this is a case where I've been able to find exactly what he was talking about. This is a drone picture that I took coming from Castle Gap, which was, everybody had to come through this Castle Gap here to get to this location. That mesa is 60 miles long, and that's the only way to get through. So once they got through there, they had to make a straight shot through it. If you look at the white lines, you can see the wagon trail is a very straight line here. But the cattle trail meanders along here. And this cattle trail was not from Goodnight themselves, because they were essentially the first ones to come through this area. But after they were successful, one after another of the cattle drives would come through, and they all followed the same general route. And then after many, many cattle drives, that's why we start to see the vegetation change, and you can see the meandering of the cattle coming towards this location. Now, one of the things that they learned is that they couldn't let the cattle cross where the wagons were crossing, because they would destroy that wagon crossing. So I'll show you what they did here. This is just to show you how they would keep them off the wagon roads. This is a picture, just a good indication that they would parallel the wagon roads, but not ride right on top of them to destroy them. So when they came down, you can see here that they turned and came across this other turn in the river. So this is where the wagon crossings were here, but they turned them and they crossed them over here, and then they would let them drink, and they had a natural corral to keep them there. Then they would move them, once they got their fill of water, they would move them back across and then move them out to grass. And they would go up this is the heading north up the east side. They always went up the east side, not the west side. So after they got their drink, they cross them back across and go up the east side, and that is because there was more grass on that side. There was also Indian problems, and this is another account from Goodnight about one of his friends of another cattle drive.
Hoy gained the pass at Castle Canyon, and his cattle caught scent of the river and stampeded way from his hands. After they had watered, he readily regained control and threw the herd away from the river to graze. A large party of Indians charged them, took the cattle and horses, and wounded 3 men and the valiant Mrs. Hoy, who tended the wounded of others and loaded guns until she was too weak to go on. As the Indians drove the cattle across the river, Hoy placed his wounded in the wagon, and with the vehicle pushed and pulled by men, carried them to refuge in the old adobe walls, the ruins of the Butterfield stage stand. There they were besieged for 3 days. On the 4th, they saw dust rising in the direction of the Castle Gap, and as the Indians raised the siege, crossed the river, and took the trail of the herd, Colonel Dalrymple rode up with his men. He had found where the Indians had burned Hoy's wagon and carts in the canyon, and had rushed on to discover the fate of the outfit.
So this was going on quite often, and Charles Goodnight has many accounts of stories, a few of them his own, but many of them from his other drive leaders that went up and down, and they would meet and tell the different stories. He had a lot of them in Haley's book. That story that we're talking about, I was able to find out exactly where they were. And so here's the stage station, and here is, you can see the gully. And that is the only large gully that could have handled a wagon that he's talking about. So they must have had the wagon out here in this location, and they pushed it down into this gully for their protection. And then later they moved it from there to the stagecoach station. And this is a story from Kate Hoy, the daughter.
Before the Indians reached us, my father put the children and myself in the wagon and told us to drive down in a gully while they prepared to fight. Mother loaded the guns for the 12 men, while the Indians made an attack on us.
So here again, using satellite imagery, I was able to find exactly what these stories are talking about, which is to archaeology is quite exciting, especially historical archaeology. Going further up the river to the north, if you look closely here, and this is something that I've been able to tune my eyes to looking at satellite imagery, you can actually see the remnants of multiple cattle drives. Here, you can just see those lines out here. These are not happening at the same time. These are drives that were happening at different times, and they would move them to one side or the other as they would not want to keep onto the same trail every single time. If you look to the left here, this dark area is the old stagecoach road. And the question I have had the question many times of why they went up the east side when many of the wagon trains went up the west side. Well, if you look here, you can see why. To this day, the east side had more grass. So all of this is alkaline, pretty much dead area here. And then this is a very small, or not small, not a very high mesa. And that would have, if they went to that side, they would be stuck in this one very, very small area. But if they went up this side, they had much more space and grass. So the crossings were not just one, but there was actually 4 crossings. This is the location of the crossings. The wagon crossing here is they would come down and make their crossing here. The cattle would deviate over to this crossing here. The Indians would come down and come straight across. And the reason they crossed here was because they were heading north up to Big Spring and then on up into the Oklahoma area. So they would cross here and then kind of deviate to the north to the Big Spring area. This is coming from the east here. And the Butterfield Trail, here's where the station was. And later, after they stopped using the northern Pecos route, they changed it to crossing the river and going to Fort Stockton. And what they would do is they would bring one wagon down and stop on one side. They'd bring the other wagon and stop on the other, and they would bring the passengers and the mail across in a small skiff boat in an actual stagecoach wagon. Sometimes you'll read about they crossed in a ferry, and a lot of people get the wrong idea of what they're talking about. It wasn't a ferry to hold the wagon. It was just a little skiff boat ferry. So we'll talk about the event. Like he said, we started in 2020. It's always had this, since 36 here, they've had this memorial and all of the information about the various people and organizations that came across there. There were many wagon trains that crossed here, by the way, and that was difficult for them. Here's the first event in 2020 that we put together. Brought in a lot of chuck wagons. Each year we've had anywhere from 7 to 8 chuck wagons, all cooking. This is on the bottom here, is giving a walking tour. That a little more. We put up a tent, so I give a historical talk, a little more detail than I've given you today. Cover all of the different things about the crossing areas. The food is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything is free by donation only. We have the cannons that come from the forts here, and various reenactors set up their camps. Each year it's different. We're never sure exactly what it's going to be. 2021, they set up a memorial, built a memorial to the Confederacy because there was 5 Confederate soldiers that died at that crossing on the river there. And of course, back then, Confederate soldiers in Texas were actually Texas Rangers, and they were still fighting the Indians. There was no real battles between the Union and the Confederacy in Texas proper. So that's what this is memorializing. They ended up dying in the Indian battle. We've had, as far World War I, we have the cannons every year, as I said. Different groups will bring in buckboards or even stagecoaches. We had children come in on Fridays. Was children's school day, and here's the line of all the chuck wagons lined up. 2022, we brought the first Indians in, and that was the Humano and the Lipan Apache. We actually had the Lipan Apache as speakers at the speaker's tent. And Humano had been there every year. And this is how we were able to become friends with the Humano and the Apache. And they are actually now part of our organization. Put up displays like that and the teepees. Here's the school kids and one of the buckboards that was there that year. This is the landowner, Ernest Woodward. Here's one, and this is the chief of the Lipan Band of Texas on the tour with me that year. And we've become very good friends. And then 23, we brought in the Comanche. and we added them into it, and they come down and they do a full, practically a powwow. They do all the ceremonial dancing you can see here in their full regalia. We also started doing the campfires with music and cowboy poetry. We brought in gunslinger type of shootout things. Here's one of the Leap on Apache doing the Eagle Dance for us. Here's the Comanche drummers. And again, giving a talk in the speaker's tent. And then last year, we brought in different musical. We actually had instead of just guitar, we had a full ensemble out there at the campfire. That was pretty cool. Henry Crawford was there to talk about the Buffalo Soldiers on that one. Comanche came back. We had a stagecoach that year. We have not. This isn't for anybody to ride, but anybody who has their own horses can come down and they do trail rides. We had Lance Tamakara from the Comanche give a talk, and we have a lot of camping there. So it's dry camping for anybody who wants to come. You can tent, RV, trailer, whatever. And it's just a lot of fun just sitting around during the day. People get their guitars out, and you can stop and see all the Indians and talk with their culture, about their culture. Here's the walking tours now. So that's what I started right off the bat with. I showed you the 4 different locations. So what we do is we take people out on these walking tours to go to each one of the, so that they can see with their own eyes. And then I take with me the imaging pictures so that to remind everybody why we're standing there looking at it and what that point meant for that particular type of crossing. So we still do that both on Friday and Saturday, along with the historical talks. This year, it will be the 10th and the 11th. This is one of my favorite photos. I got up real early and got this photo. These are all biscuits, and they make incredibly good biscuits. That's my favorite thing of the biscuits and coffee I practically live on those when I'm down there. But they really, I didn't even know that they could cook that many biscuits at one time, but it's great. So the 10th and the 11th, this is the location. It's kind of pretty far out there. If you're coming from the north, you'd come down from, I guess for you guys, maybe Oklahoma City or something. It's a little bit of a drive to get down there. So most people come in and camp and stay the whole weekend. A little bit closer look, you come down, and go through the little town of Imperial, and then it's about a 2-mile drive off of the Highway 11 there, straight down to the river. And he's got it. It's a caliche gravel road, but it's well maintained going down there. And Google Maps will take you, if you put Horsehead Crossing in Google Maps, it'll take you right there. So that makes it easy for everybody. This year I have a Horsehead Crossing Celebration promo video. So if you go onto YouTube, you can find that. And some of the things that you've seen today, you'll see in that video. But that's our promo video. It's also supported by the Pecos County Historical Commission, and they have their own video plus this video also on their website. And I make a brochure with the schedules every year, and this is this year's brochure. So you can see here that on lectures start at 2 o'clock on Friday, and right after the lecture, give the walking tour. And on Saturday, we start. We do 10:30 in the morning, and then the walk, and then we do a couple of short videos in the lunchtime, and then we do another lecture area thing. And this year we'll have Patrick Darren. He's done about, I don't know, 12, 15 books on the Pecos River and West Texas. And we do a question and answer session with him. He spent a lot of time on the Pecos River, studying both the history and even the science behind the river's craziness, and all the different things of the history of the river. And then I'll do another talk on this Goodnight Loving Trail, a lot of the stuff that you just saw, but additional stuff from all the way back. If you were in the previous talk, I started outside of San Angelo here, moving west, and then all the way up through Colorado, or through New Mexico into Colorado. And then the walking tour again at 3:45. So those brochures are printed and then given out to everybody as you drive in. And as I said, everything is free. We have vendors. We have people come in with antique vending, art vending type of things. And we have Saturday night, they're actually going to have a full country and western band play to have a little dance. So there's a lot of events going on throughout the 2 days. And that will be it. It's the 10th and the 11th of October.
Thank you, Tom. Fantastic virtual round of applause, at least, for you, and a fascinating presentation. There are a couple of questions in the chat. The last link, by the way, that I put in there will take you to one of the places where you can view that YouTube promotional YouTube video that Tom was referencing. So Tom, you mentioned your organization. This question from the chat, the sponsoring organization essentially, is that Pecos County Historical Commission or the West Texas Archeological Society, or who?
Well, they have the organization that has pretty much done everything now, organizes the whole thing. It's called the Goodnight Loving Trail Horsehead Crossing Incorporated. And the Pecos County Historical Association supports it with various things, some funding and promotion. We are more like the reenactors. We come in and support it in that fashion, but I'm actually not part of the organization that runs or organizes the event. I've just taken over from the beginning. We putting the schedule out, for example, and getting speakers each year, and doing the walking tours.
Appreciate that. For our travelers, there's a question: Does Imperial have a hotel, or what's the best bet for lodging?
Imperial has an old hotel, the old motel types from the 70s, I guess it would be 70s, 80s. That's the closest location. But if you want to get into a hotel of the type that we're all used to these days, it's Fort Stockton. And Fort Stockton has grown quite a bit because of the oil business. So they have all the major chains along the freeway there. And that is 1 hour drive to Horsehead.
So earlier, our friend Tom Hawk, who's on with us, was talking about he's going to come to the Cattle Trails Conference later in October. and make that drive. So Tom, you better bring some water with you, because it sounds like that last 75 miles to Horsehead Crossing
Yeah,
is
you
dry.
can't get that far. You will end up at locked gates before you get there. That whole area is just covered with oil wells now, and because of that, you know, they keep all of their gates pretty well locked up. There is a very short amount of highway from San Angelo out towards not too far from where I live, and then it goes into an open county road that goes for about another maybe 25, 35 miles before it hits another highway that's going north and south. And that's about all you can do that, and you're really just paralleling the river, but you can't even see it. And the trail was on the north side of the river, and that is all on the south side of the river. So it makes it difficult. I've been able to find a couple of spots where it crosses a road or highway, but that's about all. Much of this area you have to find through what I've been doing, satellite imagery. I was able to get on one property early on for one of the stagecoach Butterfield stations, and they were kind enough to let me on. I worked that one for 6 months. But most of these ranchers are real hesitant about letting anybody on, and or anybody finding anything about out, because they're worried about fence jumpers and things like that, you know. So you can't blame them for that.
I have
Understood.
a Texas Atlas and Gazetteer that shows every county and all the roads in each county. And when I contact you, Tom, I will tell you the route that I have laid out from the Haley biography and everything else that I know.
Right.
Maybe you can tell me where I might run into locked gates. I'm figuring that if I'm going to do some dirt roads, that I probably will need a four-wheel drive high clearance vehicle.
No, I don't think so. As far as the four-wheel drive goes, because there's only a few roads you can drive on that are not highways, and those are usually oil rig roads, so they keep them up.
Okay.
But it's very dirty and dusty, of course, but there's really not even that many. If you're coming down, there's a few places that they would stop at, and those are well known. Fort Chadbourne, for example, is a very, very good museum. And that was one of the stopping points of both the Butterfield Trail stagecoach and the Goodnight cattle drive. At that time, it was abandoned when Goodnight came through, but that is one of the stopping points, is open to the public and is an incredibly good museum.
Thank you.
It's a multi-million-dollar museum, really.
Thank you.
It's privately owned, and they're really, we did all of the archaeology for that fort.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you for both Toms, but thank you, Tom Ashmore, for a fascinating presentation. And the previous presentation by Tom on Cattle Trails Showcase is posted on YouTube, as Lonnie noted there. We need to wrap up. Thanks again, Tom, for a terrific presentation. Sounds like it's going to be a great event again at Horsehead Crossing. And there was a question in chat. I put a link in there for the historiccattletrails.com website. Our our event will be in Cleburne, Texas on October 24 and 25. Basically, there's some pre-conference events. The conference itself begins with lunch on Friday, October 24, and goes through lunch on Saturday, the 25th. Details are coming to the website. There are conference hotels identified on the website currently. And it's also the same weekend as Red Steagall's Cowboy Gathering in the Stockyards in Fort Worth. So it's going to be a fantastic month of October. Take in the Horsehead Crossing celebration out at the Pecos, and then join us in Cleburne for the Cattle Trails Conference later in the month. So Lonnie, what's on tap for our next Cattle Trails showcase?
Well, I think you just described it, Ron. We are gonna find out more about all the events of the consortium meeting in Cleburne.
Exactly. And so we do our Cattle Trails showcase each month on the second Friday of each month. So it happens that we'll be on October 10 while the school tours are going on at the Horsehead Crossing. And then the conference takes place in Cleburne on October 24, 25. Unless there's anyone else with questions, thanks again to Tom. We'll need to wrap up for today, but until next time, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everyone.
Tom, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, great.
It won't accept that.